It's very nice to be here. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. This is a terrific program tonight. As was mentioned, I'm Dan Lewin. I'm the chair of the Churchill Club this year, our 25th year, and I'm also a vice president at Microsoft. Welcome to tonight's event, and it's got a great title, What the Public Believes, which is the truth. New trends in corporate reputation management. This is an incredibly interesting topic, and I'm glad to see we've got a good turnout tonight. It is one of those that couldn't be more timely given all the issues these days in sort of the modern connected world. We've got a great group of speakers tonight. Paul Bergevin from Intel, Peter Diamandis from the X Prize Foundation, Richard Edelman from Edelman PR, and Frank Shaw from Microsoft. And of course, our moderator, John Byrne of Sea Change Media. So thank you all for being here. I'd like to acknowledge the program sponsor tonight, and that's Edelman PR, a longtime member and sponsor and supporter of the club. The two organizations, the club and Edelman, have worked together on many things over the years, so would you join me briefly in a round of applause for Edelman? Thank you, Edelman. Couple of quick announcements, upcoming programs. Next Wednesday morning on March 3rd, we've got a program called Innovation and Change, a new normal for the legal industry, and that's a question. It's a terrific panel, including the general counsel from both Intel and CSC, so I look forward to that program. And also on March 22nd, it's a Monday night, we've got a really interesting program called FEET, F-E-E-T, Speak Louder Than Words, with Carol Kinsey-Gorin, who's the foremost expert on body language in business context, and she's an author of a terrific book called The Nonverbal Advantage. So all those little things going on at your table tonight, you'll know what they mean if you come to that program. It's a special program that's got time left after the program for networking, so you can try out everything that you've learned or missed. If you're not a member of the club, we're going to encourage you to join tonight. You can find a Churchill Club member, or you can go to the website and get those detailed benefits and information statements about the club. We're really glad you're here tonight. So if you're going to tweet tonight, we'd like you to use # Churchill Club. And now let me turn the program over to John Byrne. John is the chairman and CEO of Sea Change Media, a digital media company he founded to take advantage of the sea change that is rolling the traditional business press. John is well known in particular for his work as editor-in-chief of BusinessWeek.com and the executive editor of Businessweek. He holds the distinction of authoring a record 58 cover stories for Businessweek magazine and is also author and co-author of 8 business books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers. John, we're honored to have you here tonight, and we know you're going to drive a really interesting program, so let me turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight. We have a great panel. We have 2 of the biggest and most important brands in all of world corporate, never mind corporate America, Intel and Microsoft. We have a guru in reputation management in Richard Edelman. And we have a legitimate rocket scientist. Yes, Peter here has a graduate degree in aerospace engineering from MIT. He's also a doctor, so if there's a heart attack in the audience, we've got you taken care of. And he did it all to please his mother, he tells me. Okay, we've had a really fascinating few months in regards to reputation and image. We've seen 2 incredible man-made disasters, Tiger Woods and Toyota Motor Company. And I think there really are a lot of similarities. You know, there's sort of mishaps with certain kinds of parts. Oh. The Toyota disaster is a real interesting study, I think, and one that I want to get a lot of opinions on from our panel. I want to get them into this second-guessing category. You know, the estimated losses to Toyota on the basis of its recall alone are $2 billion. This company has lost 20% of its market value since the day before the first recall announcement went out. There are already 41 class action lawsuits against Toyota, and likely will be well over 100. No doubt it will have a dramatic and possibly long-term effect on the market share of a company. that has been, at least in the mass automobile market, the quality leader. And so let's go to Frank from Microsoft and tell us what you would have done differently if you were sitting in your same job over in Tokyo.
Okay. Well, I can second guess with the best of them. I think the first thing to note is that in any kind of crisis like Toyota is experiencing, you have to be really clear about differentiating whether you're having a business problem or a communications problem. And when you get those things mixed up is when you can make really bad decisions. And in this case, they clearly had a business problem, which was they had quality issues that they needed to resolve. And instead of tackling that specific problem, they made some relatively low priority efforts to communicate what they were doing, both to government authorities and to their consumers in a way that was trying to mitigate the damage. And in the end, what happened, of course, is that it got completely out of control and that somebody else drove the story for them. So the first rule of crisis communications, you have to own your own story and you have to tell your own story. And the first part of that means being willing to acknowledge where all the problems are. And in the case of Toyota, they didn't either know or acknowledge the problems rapidly enough. So instead of having one really bad news cycle where they would say, this is what's happened, this is what we're doing, we've declared an end to this particular crisis and we're moving on, which is the best thing to do, they did a series of small steps, and each time they got cut and they got hurt and they took reputation damage along the way. And in the end, they did do the right things, but they took all the pain that was associated with them, and they didn't get the benefit of doing the right thing out of the gate. So it will be a long recovery for them to bring their reputation back to where it was.
Paul, do you think Toyota made one big mistake early on?
Early on, I'd agree with Frank. Too little, too late. It's very important to, correctly diagnose the problem that you have and respond in a forthright manner. I think the key mistake was misreading the harm that was being posed directly to the brand of Toyota, which has evolved. We all know Toyota now is a modern company, reliable cars. Everybody, kind of got used to the idea that their Toyota would run forever. And here was an issue where, quality was questioned. Accelerators were accelerating without human volition. You had brakes in some cars. And to me, the thing to do in those situations is to stand up and say, we stand behind our cars. We'll fix anybody's car that is broken. Here's the website. Here's what you need to do it. Recalls are painful. Some of you will remember Intel went through one with the Pentium years ago. Doing it early, doing it forthrightly, and being true to your brand is important. And now, Frank is correct that they responded very slowly. There was a lot of cultural tone deafness that people have talked about with respect to Japanese companies and how they operate. But to me,
there were even the television ads that allowed them to, or that they used to wrap the American flag around the brand.
This is what I'm
instead
getting
of dealing with the problem that they had.
It's as if once they did figure out, okay, we have a crisis, and they started running these ads, that somebody was actually thinking the problem they needed to address was that Toyota, as a Japanese company, was facing anti-Japanese sentiment. And so they needed to wrap themselves in an American flag. And so they really misdiagnosed the problem. They're a global brand that had a problem that cut to the promise of reliability and quality, and they responded in a ham-fisted kind of way.
So Richard, what grade would you give Toyota so far?
About a D.
A D?
Yeah, not an F, but a D. And so the things that really drive corporate reputation today, we just finished this trust barometer that we do every year, and it's changed fundamentally in the last 2 years. First is quality products and services. Second is transparent company. Third is a company I can trust. Now, at the very bottom are what the numbers are and the outstanding leader. So what didn't they do? They didn't tell us how they got to the problem, what they were going to do to fix it. I think they had Mr. Toyota come over here 3 times. Once is enough. I mean, you know, if you have to satisfy a domestic constituency that the boss is coming over to apologize, once is good. Then put someone out who's an engineer. Their head of U.S. operations gets before the Congress and says, I have no idea. I'm sorry, Mr. Congressman, I have no idea why the accelerator didn't work. Put up an engineer person. Put up someone who can actually fix the problem. Put someone in charge who is not a face, but actually someone who's, you know, able to be a scientist, right? You're the scientist.
Peter, you'd go right out in front, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then run out and back.
Very honest.
So, Richard, you mentioned 3 factors that are crucial in the management of corporate reputation. How have those factors changed over the years?
Well, as little as 2 or 3 years ago, it was great quality products, outstanding numbers, and superb CEO. And those last 2 are now the bottom 2 out of 10 factors. So it shows you that the events of 18 months ago had a severe shock effect on attitudes of sophisticated people. You know, they don't trust their friends and peers anymore. They don't trust CEOs. 25% trust CEOs. They'd rather hear it from fellow employees. They'd much rather hear it from experts, financial analysts, people with credentials. And they want to see it in business media, financial analyst reports. They're not so interested in getting it on Facebook or whatever. People are really shocked by what happened. General Motors, Citigroup, AIG, arguably maybe less out here because you didn't have so many scandals, but God knows where I come from. You can't believe anybody, you know, even David Patterson. I'm just kidding, that's a bad governor joke. For those of you following national news, just a little cheap shot as long as I'm on the West Coast. This is your test of whether you were reading the New York Times, right?
Wow. Peter, you're involved in actually building reputation at XPRIZE, which is getting a very good image because you serve a good function, encouraging and inspiring groundbreaking innovation. Are there secrets to how you build a reputation from nothing? Because that's what you're basically doing.
What we do at XPRIZE, for those who don't know, is we look to find a market failure, a large problem that's not being solved by capitalism. And we set a clear, measurable objective goal that says this is the objective, and the first person to do this, no matter where you come from, where you went to school, whatever you've done, if you do this, you win. And the way we do that, it's very clear, measurable, objective goals that anybody can watch. So our first one was for spaceflight. You know, and the first time that a person can build a 3-person spaceship, not think about it, not write a beautiful design, but actually build it and fly it, you win. So it's the clear, measurable, objective goals. And then it's relating it to the public so they understand when this event occurs, here's how you benefit from it. Whether it's your kids being able to dream or opening up the resources. So, I mean, that's the model. It's, you know, there's nothing being hidden. And it's something that people can get excited about and dream about.
Now, why does something so good have to have, why do you even have to pay any attention to reputation?
Well, at the end of the day, there's a sense of when you announce these things, I believe there's a line of sort of credibility when you announce something, and people either consider it credible or uncredible depending on how it's announced, who it's associated with, how audacious it is. And then a line of super credibility, above which if you can announce it with enough veracity of the people involved, that people accept it. And that line of super credibility gets people to take levels of risk that, that really drives the breakthroughs and innovation that we want.
Right. Richard, how much of reputation is art and how much of it is science? In other words, we all know that a good reputation has some value, but it feels intangible, and it feels like it's really hard to leverage the different factors that go into it in a way to make sense of it.
To me, John, the change that those of us in the comm side here have to look at is it's not just what or how a company communicates, it's actually what a company does. That matters more. And I think people can't be persuaded anymore. They have to see, and then we can make it better, but we can't fundamentally change it. So, you know, what Paul and Intel Capital did last week in DC was action. You know, this is how we're going to finance jobs in America, innovation. You know, $3.5 billion, whatever the number was. I mean, a big fun to do it. And no matter, you know, and you did a great PR job, but it was also that you did and communicated, both.
I guess when I'm asking a question about art and science, what I'm thinking is this. Is there a way to measure for a given brand what are the true leverage points, and then to put resources against those leverage points as opposed to others to maximize the value of the investment in what is really perception in this case?
Well, I think you've moved from a time when the only constituency that you had to satisfy was shareholders. So that was sort of capitalism pre-2008, right? Just shareholder maximization, Milton Friedman, deregulated markets, it's all going to be fine. And I think that it's moved in 2 years now to be stakeholder society, that you should need to measure against employees, communities, you know, a broader array, customers, as to whether they trust in the company. It's not just that they think that you're selling well.
Right. Yeah, and I'll say that you actually, you know, one of the things that we do on a regular basis is we do brand research, and we say, what are the levers of the brand? You know, both, you know, at the sub-brand level in the case of things like Microsoft Windows or Bing, or the overall master brand of Microsoft, and we say, you know, if we improve on this metric, what does that do for the brand? If we're lagging here, what does that do for the brand? And it gives us a pretty good dashboard of the things that are important to the various constituencies that we have. So you can pay attention to those things that matter as you look to build a brand that are very discrete.
Frank?
Let me be a little controversial on quantifying it. Sometimes it's only obvious to management in the breach. In your introduction, you cited the cost to Toyota for not managing its reputation crisis. That's often when management realizes the value of a strong reputation. Unfortunately, it sometimes takes incidents like that to jar management into thinking, hey, this is an asset that we should proactively protect. You can't quantify, you know, very easily, but there are surveys that exist around the world that look at relative value of brands, relative value of strong reputations. They matter in terms of correlation to customer interest in the company, desire to buy products from a company. There are very positive things associated with high brand and high reputation indices. So those kinds of persuasions work on enlightened management, and sometimes it takes the crisis that you're seeing. I promise that the functions around reputation and communications at Toyota are getting a strong examination right now. These things are very important to the value creation in that company.
Right. Now, Frank, a few years ago, Microsoft had a major event that I'm sure had reputational consequences to it. And that was a transition from an iconic founder to a professional manager. Did you think that that had image and reputation implications? And if so, how involved were you in the management of that?
Yes, we did think that there were some pretty profound implications, especially if we did it poorly. You have to remember, this was, you know, Bill Gates, you know, making a decision to move from full-time at Microsoft to part-time and remaining as the chairman. And the best possible scenario, you know, if we did our jobs flawlessly, would be that nothing bad happened. So there wasn't a whole lot of upside, really, when we looked at it.
Stasis is good.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how we wanted to do this, and we spent 2 years working through it. And we started off with, you know, an event where we said, this is what's happening, here's why we're doing it, here's what the implications are, and here's what you can expect to see over the next 2 years as we work through this transition. And so we were 100% transparent on what would take place, who would take the jobs, who would fill in, what the transition would look like. And over a 2-year period, we came back time and time again and pointed back to that and said, hey, remember back then we said this is what we were going to do? Here are the things that we've done since then. And over a 2-year period, we conditioned the market very successfully to say, yeah, they're doing exactly what they said they would do. We did it time after time. And at the end, when Bill left, it was essentially a non-event. Not from a PR standpoint, because it was a big event from a PR standpoint. There was a lot of coverage. But from a market standpoint, from an audience standpoint, people said, yes, we expected this. And at the end of the day, we really saw that nothing bad happened. So I guess that means we did our jobs that day.
Did the stock take any hit at all?
No. We had bets going into it around what it would look like. And on the day that we announced that Bill would be moving, I think the stock dropped a couple of pennies,
Right.
Which was a good thing.
Yeah. Now, of course, there are things that happen that you really have no control of, and that happens frequently in corporate life. Intel was hit by the largest fine ever levied by the European Commission.
Correct.
How do you deal with something like that?
Carefully.
People are tweeting now.
So, yeah, no, and the reality is it's very complex. The regulatory systems in various parts of the world have their job to do. A lot of that comes with the territory of being a large and successful company. You're seeing the same officials investigate Google. That just started in the last week or so. Frank is, I'm sure, very aware of that. So there's a certain degree of it that goes with the territory. Then you also look at what actual issues are people examining. And this happened in the case of Microsoft. By the time regulators get around to adjudicating matters that are brought before them, market landscapes have changed dramatically. And so many of the issues that were brought up in the EU case with Intel, we've resolved with our principal competitor, AMD. We resolved those in December of 2009. But there are other issues that are going to be brought to the table by regulators that maybe don't anticipate the very competitive environment that exists in mobile computing, in cell phones, and in other categories, where Intel is not the dominant chip supplier, is in fact a challenger hoping to break into some of these markets. So it's a complicated thing where we are, when I said carefully, it was somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's also truthful. You have to really consider the merits, be respectful that these regulators have a job to do. But those of you who read The Economist, a couple weeks ago, The Economist did a very good editorial looking at the EU as an example of, maybe it's time to take a fresh look. There's a new competition commissioner in Europe. There's something peculiar about a system where the investigators act as judge, jury, and sentencer all in one. And this came from a highly independent and respected editorial source. Other companies are looking at this. There are some certainly arguments in the direction of the Europeans taking a much more activist and interventionist role on competition policy than other parts of the world, but this is what you face as a global company.
Right. Richard, do you have any advice for Paul?
Go out drinking before we play tennis. No, look, I would say not to try and make the EU your poster child, because I'm not sure that's a battle you win. You may be right. Maybe others make that case for you. But it seems to me the more you can project your sort of nascent position in cell phones or other things, that you're a battler and whatnot, the better you'll be. Because you can't, the PC share is a harder thing to defend, seems to me.
Well, it's a market that has evolved over many, many years and is now fundamentally a two-player market. So And some of those issues, when Intel wins, somebody else loses, and so you deal with those,
Exactly.
those perceptions. And as I said, it comes with the territory.
Big success has
Right.
consequences.
Right.
There's a big bullseye on you.
But the you know, the landscape is evolving very, very rapidly, and Richard's earlier point is very apt here. We do live in a world of lots of stakeholders involved in impacting the business landscape.
And John, I think it's important to note
Public
that
policy folks among them, and regulators.
in 18 to 22 markets we looked at, business has more trust than government. It's not that people all of a sudden have said government is the fix.
18 of 22,
22
geographic markets.
That's correct, absolutely.
Right.
And the technology industry of
Yeah.
all the industries has the most halo. I mean, if you were talking
Right.
about the banking industry, it would be something else.
Yeah.
But you're not, mercifully.
And-
But, you know,
And structural issues aside, we happen to be in an industry where people get more and more capability every year for less money, and there's never been more innovation. So it's hard for us to really understand the arguments that point to competitive harm arising certainly to the consumer as a result of any market behavior.
Right.
Lower prices, more innovation, seems like a good thing.
Peter, what's the most difficult reputational issue you've had to deal with?
Probably, I guess I'll paint the picture. It's 2003. We've got a $10 million prize up for private human spaceflight. I'm sitting in Congress giving testimony about space, future of commercial space, and one of the congressmen stands up and says, "Dr. Diamandis, aren't you in fact incentivizing people to try and kill themselves?" Because the big question was, could private industry really do this?
Right.
And you know, so one of the biggest issues we had was the risk of this, you know, advancement. True breakthrough takes big risk, and if you're not willing to take, in fact, one of the things I think that's a big issue in this nation is how risk adverse we've become as a society. You know, a large corporation would do deference to the companies up here. You take a large risk and you fail, you're worrying about your stock price getting hit. A large government agency takes a risk and you're worried about congressional investigation. And so I had a comeback for him, and it was, you know, 500 years ago, thousands of people gave their lives to come across the Atlantic and open up America, and then 200 years ago, they gave their lives to open up the West on the verge of the greatest exploration America's ever taken. You're telling us to stay home and not go, and that's un-American, and they withdrew their question.
Yes.
But
Wait, did he really withdraw
yes,
the question?
we'll go back.
All right.
And here's the thing that we dealt with, which was to say up front to people, this is risky. Someone may lose their lives. And being up front with that and saying, but this is a frontier that is that people believe it's worth taking that level of risk to. You know, bought us in two ways. One, if something did happen, we had warned them in advance that something would happen. And if something didn't happen, then they were much more heroic in having achieved it. So it was
Right.
a no-loss situation
Right.
for us. But that was a big issue. And how often do large companies or CEOs, when they're taking a big risk, taking an advantage to try and make an advancement, are they upfront about how risky it really is?
Right. Actually, Peter raises a really interesting point. I mean, in some cases, large, successful organizations may be risk adverse because if a failure is more visible, right? And so it's far more likely for a major failure to have an adverse effect on your overall image and reputation and success if you're big and successful to begin with, than if in fact you're small, and your failure is not going to be as visible, frankly. Right?
And one of the things that we offer is off-balance sheet risk-taking, right? You put up a audacious
Right.
goal and no one does it. Well, that's too bad. It was too hard. And if someone does, it's a great win.
Right. So Richard, you're sitting in the corporate officers at Accenture. You've made an investment in tens of millions of dollars, perhaps over $100 million, in this guy who can swing a golf club. And there are these incredible allegations that are coming out. And everyone is reading
New
them.
York Times, come on.
What do you do, Richard? Do you pull the plug immediately? What do you do? Your brand and its reputation have been aligned with a celebrity.
To me, it's, okay, so do I do it in the first day? Do I do it in the first week? Or do I do it in the first 2 weeks is sort of the question. And I certainly would have been suggesting to Mr. Woods' handlers that if such evil, or whatever you want to describe it, was going to come out, let us do it at once and let us see what the reaction is. In the slow peeling of the Band-Aid, that's the best way I could describe that, this was just a car wreck. And so, bad joke, you got it.
You're mixing your metaphors here.
You see, you like this? This is all good. But here's the thing. Your brand equity in the Accenture brand can't stand association with that kind of matter. And you have to say, I'm sorry, I've invested $15 million. It's going to cost me a hell of a lot more if I don't do this now.
Right.
And I'm amazed that it's taken as long for other sponsors.
Frank, why do you think it took Gatorade so long to withdraw?
Well, I think the real question is you have to look at what is core to your brand. What is absolutely core to your brand? And in the case of Accenture, trust is absolutely core to the brand. And having somebody who is not trustworthy as the front person for that is something that is completely unacceptable. And they had to make a move really quickly because they couldn't take the damage. Gatorade's a little bit different. Trust is not at the core of Gatorade's brand. Yeah, it's salty and it tastes good. So they didn't have to make quite as dramatic a choice because they could wait and see how things played out over time and then make the decision yes or no based on whether or not the thing that you brought to the table with an athlete like Tiger Woods was recoverable. And when he said, I don't know when I'm going to be on the tour again, then that looks at that looks at their brand and they say, okay, we need spokespeople that represent athletic ability, and if he's not willing to do that, then we need to back away.
Okay, we're 2 years into the future, and Paul, there's this golfer who comes along, and his name is Tiger Woods, and we're a forgiving society, and maybe he's redeemed himself, and he's looking for a new corporate sponsor. Do you say yes to Tiger Woods in 2 years for Intel?
Golf and Intel, I don't know. No, it's a fair question. I think there's a very strong redemptive spirit in America. It's not clear how fully rehabbed he will be in 2 years. So it's easy to dodge that question to a degree.
But he's cheap now.
He's cheaper. I think he needs to get out and golf again, which is what he does for a living. But I'd say that the legacy of this and Intel's values are pretty incompatible, so it would be a long shot.
Richard, when a brand or a company takes a reputational hit, what are the kinds of things that it can do to resurrect itself, typically?
I think the first is to establish some kind of roadmap to say, judge us by these actions. Here's what we promise. Judge us by that. Second is to have a person who owns the process of evolution. So if you're Toyota, it's the director of engineering, but to try and personalize it as opposed to make it corporate and vague. And third, tell your employees what you're doing. I mean, this to me is the greatest miss of most companies, is they talk to regulators, they talk to the press, and they leave the employees completely in strange land, and that's just bad. Because the employees are going to talk anyway, and they are a primary source of information, good or bad. So you may as well talk to them, talk to your channel. It is a...
Well, the other point of that, if anyone's going to be on your side, it should be your employees.
Absolutely.
So you have an army of people who you can marshal on your behalf, And yet so many companies don't do it.
Especially in this day of social, media and
Right.
tweeting and everything else that employees do. So Richard's right.
It's real democratization, John, and it seems to me the more you can have small victories instead of big ones, the better you are, actually. It's little steps. It's not some, oh, we're fixed.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Frank, how does social media complicate corporate reputation?
Well, it makes it both easier and more difficult. It makes it easier because in some ways we have more ways of communicating than ever before. And if you think about social media as a way of putting a human face on a company and leveraging the value of the employee base in a real, genuine way, then it's an asset. It's a huge asset where people say it's not just a faceless company. It is a real person, and we've seen that time after time at Microsoft, where when you are successful in putting a human face on something, whether it's good or bad, it certainly makes it easier to communicate in a very believable way. So that's the upside, and the downside, of course, is that there's lots more channels of communication, and the ability to have a confidential conversation with a large number of employees is difficult. We had a company meeting where it's a confidential company meeting, and we were talking about some things that we were doing. We showed some hardware that hadn't been shown yet, and somebody took a photo of it from the meeting and put it up on Facebook. Not because they were trying to make news, but it was like they were excited. They were sharing information with their friends. Holy cow, I'm so excited about this new thing that's coming out. And then all of a sudden we have a PC World feature on this piece of hardware that hasn't been announced yet. And that is the downside of social media, is that news travels extremely rapidly, and you have to give up on the idea that you can have a completely command and control view of when the news gets out.
John,
I want to know what happened to the guy who took that picture on his smartphone.
wasn't good.
No,
okay.
Actually, we had a long discussion about it. Where I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm just really excited about this, and look, it's kind of cool." I'm like, "No, it's not kind of cool." And then let me explain. Let me show you the damage that's caused. I mean, you've got an entire team that's spun up. You have partner dissatisfaction because it actually wasn't our device. It belonged to one of our hardware partners. So now they're grumpy about this, and we've given the competition a leg up to try to copy us. Like, here are all the bad things that can happen now. How do you feel about this? And he's like, "Oh, that's not such a good idea." And the only problem with that is that's the whack-a-mole thing, and it doesn't scale very well. I mean, there's lots of moles popping up all the time, and you're just going like this.
Richard, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to put out that I think as we have shrinkage of authority media, shrinkage of really reliable, straight up the middle, without too much opinion media, I think companies increasingly are going to have to be their own media companies. And this may be a heretical idea, but it is your point of view that you put up and allow discussion around it and encourage others to contribute to it and have a series of really substantive white papers and expert commentary and comments from your employees, comments from your vendors, customers. There's nothing wrong with that. And particularly if you're if you're not Microsoft, if you're not Intel, if you're a smaller player, you're not going to necessarily get the attention that you would have gotten 5 years ago, John. Wouldn't you? I mean, wouldn't you say a Business Week is just a smaller venture right now?
Yeah.
It's
And
distributed.
we've seen it too, where journalists who you can never get not to talk were tweeting things during the acquisition of Business Week by Bloomberg. "Oh, I'm going upstairs for my interview to see if I'll have a job today." "Oh, I got my package." I mean, you could literally cover the layoffs that we had to go through as an institution through the tweets of the journalists who you really couldn't control. Paul, you have rules on use of social media by employees to manage that
Sure.
impact?
Let me follow up on,
Yeah.
on the general comments, and then I'll get into that. We have guidelines. They were actually featured in a Harvard Business Review article about social media guidelines in companies. I'll get back to that in a second. When you think about reputation, it's the sum total of a company's behavior or a person's behavior that gets reflected out into the market. So social media is extremely well suited to lifting reputation or putting a light on reputation when used properly, because it values authentic stuff, right? And it's how actual companies behave or people behave that gets reflected in the tweets and other social media posts. One quick example, one of Intel's primary philanthropic thrust as a business is education. We're dependent on math and science grads. We care about education around the world, and a lot of money is donated to education through our foundation and other efforts. Companies writing checks is not an easy thing to get people excited about. It's like, so what, right? I mean, you have the same problem, Frank. And we created an online community called Inspire. It's all about teachers and students having a place to congregate. They share ideas, and all Intel did was convene the site and make for a place for that conversation to occur. That feels to me like a very helpful use of social media to bring people together in that instance. And also it helps sustain knowledge of Intel's serious contributions and efforts in the area of education when there aren't news spikes like an event or a check bestowing or any of that stuff happening, and you can't always sustain that. Now, getting back to guidelines, companies need to, I think, democratize information flow, simple, straightforward, non-onerous guidelines that encourage people to talk about what they know, but not talk about what they don't know, are useful. And we manage this at Intel, a combination of my group and marketing primarily manage a set of guidelines, and there's certification that people go through, and it works pretty well, and a ton of people are participating in the process, because we tried to make it, as I said, non-onerous.
Right.
I think the challenge is that we went through a similar process at Microsoft, and we started with a very basic premise, a single rule, which is be smart about what you do in social media, and that was it. And we said, look, you already have an employee handbook. You've got a set of guidelines that you're held to. So as you think about social media, just be smart, and that's worked extremely well. And over the years, we sort of carved it out a little bit more. But one of the interesting things that we're seeing now is that people have to understand that there is no difference between what they say personally and what they represent professionally.
Right.
And this is the place where where I see people struggle the most. They'll say, look, I said this about, I had a bad experience at an airline or something like that, and so I tweeted about it or whatnot. And yes, I'm a relatively senior person at Microsoft, and no, I didn't really think that they were a major purchaser of our software. And that, and I just use that as an example. Seriously, it's just an example. But the idea that people have to think about who they are, both personally and professionally, at the same time, is a very hard thing to do. And so the idea that you can have two personas, my work Frank and my personal Frank, that era is really going away. There's a single person, and you have to think about your communications through that lens as well.
Richard, should companies be monitoring what's said about them on the web and responding immediately in a proactive way to it?
That depends, because, I'll use an NGO analogy. You don't have to respond to the people for ethical treatment for animals if you're a food company, because they are clearly extreme. Greenpeace, maybe, probably, Audubon, 100% you do. So, I'm just trying to give you an analogy, maybe a little forced, but I think you should certainly be monitoring. I also think, though, you should have, and I'm going to use a Steve Rubel idea here, the idea of embassies. You should have digital embassies. You should be on Facebook. You should be in places where there's high traffic and say, we're open for conversation. You got a problem? Come to us. And we were also watching and trying to, and that person who is the Facebook embassy ambassador will go and say, oh, by the way, we saw something here, you know, can we talk? So yes, but don't overreact. Don't pull the panic button and, you know, push the panic button and go berserk right away, because there's those who matter and those who don't matter. And if you always are pushing the panic button, then you have no credibility at some point. You're a wolf thing.
So I'm hearing everybody in a defensive mode, pretty much, instead of the utilization of it for really furthering corporate brand in terms of, I mean, one of the things that I think about is how ineffective advertising will become in the future, and how really aligning one's authentic mission with authentic PR and driven by not what the newspaper is saying, but what someone I trust is saying about it is probably the most powerful way to get to build one's brand and build trust. So, you know, so I'm wondering about, you know, do you think about how to utilize that? I mean, for us at XPRIZE, we use social media in two ways. One is as a way to, for example, we have our Progressive Automotive XPRIZE, and we try and give 136 vehicles into that competition. We try and use social media around them, and it carries Progressive's brand as part of that message point out there as these teams are doing these heroic things. And the other part of what we use social media for is really crowdsourcing genius. When there is a problem we don't know how to solve, and we put it out there into the, you know, social sphere. One example that's a great example, not one of ours, but one in the incentive prize arena, a good friend, Rob McEwen, who in 2000 bought a gold mine, and he asked his engineers and scientists, where can I find the gold in this gold mine? And they gave him an insufficient answer. And so he created a $500,000 prize, asking people, where will I find the next $6 million ounces worth of gold? And normally, one of these geological companies, mining companies, keep their data locked in a safe. And he did the exact opposite. He took all the data and put it up on the web, and he said, where is it? Where's the gold? And he had 80 different people register and download the data, 25 enter it. The top 3 that never visited the mine identified where 6 million ounces. Now multiply that times $1,000 an ounce, $6 billion. So crowdsourcing, you know, the question you have to ask yourself is, do you have the smartest people working for in your company? And I know with, you know, Microsoft and Intel, you probably have a lot of them. But, I mean, do you have everybody around the world? And so social media as a mechanism to elevate the problems, and what we do for us is we elevate the world's biggest grand challenges and say, you know, somebody who's a genius high school kid in India, or, you know, an ex-Kazakhstani rocket scientist may have the answer, bring it to us.
Right. Open source innovation. I mean, I have a more mundane example where I guess it was maybe 9 months ago I had a problem with a Dell laptop. I tweeted the problem, not as a complaint, but actually asking my followers, do you have any idea how you can fix this for me? Within 5 minutes, I had a tweet from a Dell customer rep. In 10 minutes, he was on the phone, and my problem was solved. Now, I became a champion for Dell, even though I'm a diehard Apple fan.
Now the only thing is, though, the thing we have to be careful with, because I've had similar experiences, but most people on Twitter have maybe 100 followers.
Luckily, I have 19,000.
That's right, and they're not the renowned Business Week editor-in-chief.
Yeah, you're right. That's a really good point.
You know, I think the lesson we have to draw from it is that there are absolutely examples like that where companies do remarkable things of customer care, and they have to be careful not to overpromise, because the worst thing in the world is to say, I'm out there, I'm listening, and then, you know, you say, I'm having a problem, and they say, gee, I'm really listening.
Right. Right.
And that happens once or twice, and all of a sudden that's not a positive brand experience.
Right. Richard, what's the most actionable advice you can give the audience in terms of how to manage reputation? I imagine that we have a good number of entrepreneurs in the audience who actually are the official ambassadors for their companies. What's the best actionable advice you can give them?
Okay, I would say first, and let's say it's a large company to start, don't rely on the CEO to be your sole or even arguably primary messenger. I think that the era of celebrity CEO is way passé. It is not to say to hide that person, but this is not the time for Jack Welch or others.
This goes to your point that Toyota should have brought the director of engineering now.
Correct.
To address an engineering problem in a credible way.
Correct,
Right.
100%. Again, if you have to have the CEO because of stuff going back to Tokyo, great, do that once, and that's it. In fact, we did research on the Bridgestone case, this goes back 8 or 10 years, and the first time was effective, the second and third time the CEO came was bad. You know, and there is some aspect of national face. You need an American to be solving an American problem. This is what is seen to be better. So, okay, back to your primary question, Deviant. The second thing to me is realize that it takes somebody 5 times to hear or see or something before he or she believes it in different places from different people. 5 times. That's the extent of distrust or skepticism or whatever else you want to describe it. So you have to say it multiple times. You may be bored with it, but have different people say it and have it in different places. Be omnipresent. And I think the third is, in as much as you can remember this admonition of act and tell, if you try and sell what is not substantive, I think you're in deep trouble. You're in more trouble than you know, because people, again, are incredibly skeptical. They don't trust business. 75% of people believe that business is going to go back to business as usual as soon as the recession is over. That tells you that people are skeptical.
And probably smart.
And maybe smart. But do and then tell.
All right. Well, as is customary at the Churchill Club, we open this up to the audience. Pretend that you're in Parliament and understand that the more irreverent your question is, you will score additional points for it. So, do we have someone over here?
Bring it on.
Okay, great.
Test. I have a question. Jeremiah from the Altimeter Group. Responding to customers on Twitter or Facebook or anything like that, isn't that just teaching your customers to yell at their friends when they have a problem?
Good question. Frank?
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think that this is an example where there aren't going to be any universals. People are going to express legitimate concerns online in a variety of places. The ability to respond to those concerns is important, and if they're real and you can deal with them, you should. And in the case of Microsoft, one of the things we are doing is we do look at the customer response, what's happening online, and if in fact there are solutions that exist to the problems, we point those people to the solutions. That doesn't teach people to yell. I think it teaches people that there are solutions and that there's better ways of getting them than they found previously. People are more comfortable today expressing their opinions online, expressing their questions online, and we need to be equally prepared to deal with them in that same venue.
Paul,
But
you
if,
agree
but
with
if a
that?
person's being a bully, I think you have to call them out too. I mean, I think that you cannot be, wimpy in response to. I go back to the PETA analogy. If people are really distorting your position and whatnot, you must come back pretty hard.
I think the question gets to etiquette to some degree. How do you treat your friends? And in the online world, those communities are actually your 19,000 followers on Twitter. Your actual social circles is a little bit smaller than that, I'm guessing. But, I think you need to be courteous and polite and not impose on your friends in general. And I think we're now just starting to figure out, it's an evolving thing. I don't think people have figured out exactly what's an appropriate way to, you know, get your community of friends, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, engaged in a problem or not. In some cases, it's imposing on real friends, and in other cases, it's just taking advantage of a social network. And judgment needs to be applied just as you would do in any interpersonal or social situation. But I think the medium is new enough that it's good to have this kind of discussion, because I think people are figuring out how to behave, and it's not always that clear.
Next question.
You mentioned, Richard, that business in 18 out of 20 of your sectors were rated higher than government. I'm from government. I represent local government, and actually there are probably tens of thousands of governments across the country all doing amazingly different things. How do we deal with reputation when you have the great public who expect more, want to pay less, get government off my health care but don't touch my Medicare, I love my library but I hate the city? How do we deal with reputation management in this kind of world with no resources, impossible demands, and high expectations?
So it seems to me that government has been long on personality and short on trying to be clear on what its priorities are. I think the best kind of recommendation I could give to government right now is speak clearly to the people, give them a chance to try and help you formulate what is a good way forward, and then say, okay, we have to make choices. You know, this is not about promising everything, because, you know, that's what's gotten government in trouble, is making too many promises and not having this, you know, we have a budget, we have to actually fit within. And you do have to win the hearts and minds, not just of traditional influencers, but of new ones, people who have new voices. You know, in fact, we did a study that found that legislative assistants in Washington are more likely to go to Politico or other blogs first before the Washington Post now. So just a small indicator of the change in the Vox Populi. So you have to establish what it is you're going to do, deliver, but do it on the basis not just of smoke-filled rooms and, you know, small group, but have a consensus of influencers, new and old.
Vox Populi, I like that.
Vox Populi.
Peter,
Yes.
you have perspective on that, managing a social enterprise? I mean, isn't it important to remind people of the good stuff that government does instead of the bad stuff?
So, John, we're in a society that isn't very statist, right? We tend to not overly value government in relation to the private sector. So I think that's a very tough problem that he poses, and I think we'd be kidding ourselves to say there's an easy solution. But at times of great distress in our society, when the market fails, as happened in the Great Crash, has happened with suffragette, has happened with the end of slavery. Government intervention ends up accomplishing positive social goals, and people appreciate the role of government when times are tough. And I think that's, you know, we're probably in one of those times now, and it would be very incumbent on those who want to see government's reputation rise to actually call out, like, positive results that are being delivered. And I think the challenge that is faced is that, you know, we don't see enough tangible evidence of concrete results coming from government, and it's hard to then transfer your knowledge to some, I think government should have a better rap than it does, you know, and people have a hard time with that in our society.
There's an interesting, the other interesting piece of it, and the opportunity, is that right now a lot of our public debate is dominated from the edges, you know, from the people who are loudest and care most on the left and on the right. And the promise of some of the new ways of new media, the new media that we're seeing, is that if it lives up to a potential, it gives the people in the middle more of a voice. And all too often, I think we end up listening really hard to the loudest voices on the fringes of the conversations.
Yep.
Just to give you one example, if you look at the comments that get left on websites and on blogs, some of them are pretty extreme. And it's easy to look at those and say, wow, the people that are reading this website are just absolutely nuts. And as an advertiser, you look at that. As somebody in communications, you say, why would I ever put my executive in a place where they would have to deal with this? But the numbers say that less than 2% of people that read these websites ever leave a comment. So you have to think about all the people in the middle who are essentially underserved right now in this debate. And is there an opportunity to talk to them and sort of break the paradigm of sort of the talking heads yelling at each other? And I think that, from a government standpoint, is an opportunity. If there is a way of reaching that big middle in a way that hits home, that can build the reputation in a way that nothing else can.
Peter, you had one last point.
Yeah, just very quickly, I feel for the government. Sometimes it's trying to do the right thing, and media spins it in the wrong way.
Yeah.
I mean, the situation recently, for example, was NASA. How many of you heard NASA has abandoned the moon mission? We're coming home, we're not
Right.
going, and so forth. Well, the fact of the matter is that NASA had a moon mission which was completely unaffordable. And what NASA's done instead is said, we're going to invest in the private sector and invest in technology to bring the price down so that we can afford it. And the price of going into space has been going up for 40 years. It's unsustainable. The failure rate's been going up. And the best way to go to space right now is with the Soyuz in Russia. It's 100 times safer than the shuttle. We're shutting down the shuttle and buying Soyuz seats. And so all of a sudden NASA does, for me, unbelievably the most logical thing it could possibly do. Invest in the commercial sector that would bring the price down and go from room-sized computers to the PC and allow us all to go to space eventually. And they get slammed and say we're shutting down the moon mission. And so where do you don't win.
Next question.
It seems like I want to connect a couple things here. One is it seems like there's a great focusing that's going on. So there's a study that came out from Pew today that says that the average American visits one or two news sources and no others, and they don't have brand loyalty. So so we're in an age of media agnosticism, where people just kind of float around between media. The second thing I've noticed.
Well, wait a minute though. If they only have one or two brand sources, that means they're pretty darn loyal, doesn't it?
But they float in and out. They don't know which one they've gone to.
Oh, I see. Okay, so they
that's
can't identify it.
And it's coming through, and a lot of it's coming through Facebook, where people spend an average of 7 hours a month, which is 3 times the largest website.
Right.
And the last stat I'll throw out is that there's something called Dunbar's Law that talks about that the average person is only capable of managing 150 friendships. So it's focus. It's all focus. So the thought that I have, and it's a question really especially for Microsoft and Intel, is let's just say that people are focusing more on their friends, arguably, and using that and their family as a filter for information. It seems like on the employee engagement side, you guys have a big opportunity because you have surface area because of the number of employees that you have that nobody, that are experts, by the way, to the trust point. So I see the negative side of it, Frank, where you talk about I have whatever, 50,000, 60,000, 100,000 employees, and every one of them is a potential risk at a big meeting. But I'm curious if you see anybody, either in your world or outside, linking up employee engagement and digital engagement as a way to further trust, and who's doing that well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Peter made a good point. It's like we're all in the balance of managing risk, right? So social media and engagement on social media certainly has risk, but the reason we do it is there's a high reward. Right, there is tremendous opportunity, and so there's 90,000 Microsoft employees, and on our good days, we do a good job of making sure that they understand the mission of the company and what we're doing and what's important and how they can help, and they communicate that out through a variety of different mediums. A good example would be when the company donated money after the Haiti earthquake. and there's a matching program, and the employees piled on, and they talked about it to each other, to their families, and as a result, we saw an enormous multiplier effect that happened from our ability to help in that area. And that's an example that is philanthropic in nature, but it's also true across the different products. The best evangelists for the company are not necessarily the people who are paid to be marketers. They're the people that develop the product, that talk about the product, that engage with customers, that live on the blogs. And that is the reason that we continue to say, yes, be smart about what you do, is because we really do see the value of the engaged employee and the engaged partner and the engaged ecosystem across the board.
I agree with Frank's comments, and we have 80,000 employees around the world doing business in multiple languages. Not everyone is certified to be a social media advocate or a practitioner, but a lot are, thousands are. And if you think about individuals reaching their circle of 150 friends, I agree with the premise that social media is a multiplier, has a multiplier effect on your ability to get a message out in a credible way to people who are likely to believe their friends. So that's a very useful thing. And I'll just come back to a comment Richard made earlier, which is that businesses increasingly have to think about self-publishing and going direct to their customers and other important stakeholder groups and constituents, reaching them not through the filter of traditional media, although I still believe, John, you'll be happy to know, I don't agree with the premise of that study. There are the dinosaur media consumers out there like me who really value their brands and trust their brands and depend on their brands every day. So I don't know that that is a totally reflective study of all media consumers. It might be more appropriate for a younger audience, perhaps, who didn't grow up with traditional media. So my point is, great thing, use it. It multiplies the message, and companies need to self-publish, but not to the exclusion of working effectively with traditional media, because I think there's a tremendous interplay between old and new media, and in fact, the biggest stories are the ones that bounce in the echo chamber between the two.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Jerry Corbett with Red Flag and a 12-year veteran of a Japanese company. And while folks want to compare Tiger and Toyota, I think the big difference is one was ignorant, the other one was arrogant. I would venture, and I'd like your opinion on, I think Toyota's issue was one of diversity, and the fact that they just had a single American up there as a spokesperson who didn't know anything about the problem, and everything was managed and conducted out of Japan. And Japan is one of the last homogeneous societies in the world, and I'd venture to say that part of their issue was one of diversity. I'd like your opinion.
Richard?
Jerry, what you're saying is diversity in the sense of America versus Japan, or diversity of multiplicity of problems?
I think diversity of thought.
On the management team.
The fact is, having worked at a Japanese company, I can tell you that all the marching orders comes out of Tokyo. And I saw the same pattern with the with the Toyota problem. They didn't bring out the big guns until they got into trouble. And all the marching orders came out of Japan. And since there's no diversity of thought, no diversity in the executive population, they couldn't really deal with this diverse problem that they had.
But I think the lesson that you're drawing is that you've got to give some autonomy to the local subsidiary. And I don't think it's exclusively a Japanese problem. I mean, I've seen plenty of American tech companies be very command and control in dealing with their subsidiaries, whether it's in China or in Brussels or wherever. I mean, you two should talk about this, because how much leeway do you two give to subs?
I'll let him go first.
Well, Intel has a unique advantage in that respect. It's within the business of making microprocessors, there's a great deal of variability. It's all different kinds of chips for all different kinds of applications, but it's a very focused company. So there aren't different product silos around the world. It's not heavily divisionalized in that sense. So the decisions that are made that affect reputation, that affect key communication with customers and with governments around the world can be coordinated and linked very nicely across the globe.
But just the classic one for me was Coca-Cola on that so-called 60 teenagers in Belgium got sick.
Yeah.
The CEO was in France. He flew home rather than going and giving them all a bunch of other soda. Scientifically, there was nothing wrong with this stuff. It just was bad tasting.
Sure.
Right? And the kids all got psychosomatic illness. But it was just an easy thing to do.
Yes.
Because it was our Coke mindset is because of Atlanta, it's scientifically okay.
Right.
But the value judgment of the French and Belgian media was, for Christ's sake, these kids are in the hospital. How can you not, and that was too much central for me.
That is a good example of deferring to the local management that really understands the situation a lot better. But ideally, you do that within the framework of a company brand, and you don't.
And there are some things that need to be handled locally.
Right.
Citizenship and governmental relations need to be handled locally. It would be ludicrous to think that any company could sit in any country, whether it's the United States or Japan, and mandate what's going to be good for that subsidiary to do. So you have to give them latitude to deal with local issues in a local way. You can't be mindless about it, but you have to be thoughtful, and you have to empower the subsidiaries to make good decisions. And there are things that do need to be centralized, that a brand needs to stand for something. And today, all brands are global. You really don't have very many truly local brands. And if you're going to have a global brand, you need to think about what those attributes are, and you need to make sure that those are reinforced regardless of where the brand shows up.
Next question.
Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Hi, this is Falguni Bhuta. I'm from Opera Software. It's a question for Frank, actually. This is about recent events in Europe where you've been having the browser, the choice screen situation going on. And so my question was, how are you handling that, and what has been your strategy from the last 2 years that this debate has been going on, especially when you have to promote your competitors on the choice screen and at the same time protect your reputation and get as many users as possible?
It is a very interesting situation. We talked a little bit about regulation earlier, and this is an example where Microsoft, in cooperation with the European Union, they had some concerns around the way the browser was distributed. Microsoft had a point of view that it's pretty easy to get a browser, but as we sort of worked through it with the EU, we came up with a variety of different proposals, and we ended up with a ballot screen where when it'll be pushed out to every user of Windows in Europe, and they will get to make a choice. What browser do you want to install? And there's a list of browsers that that will show up there on the screen, and each consumer will get to decide. I want this browser. I want Firefox. I want IE. I want Opera. Whatever the case may be. And we had to make it as easy as possible for that to happen. And in fact, we had to randomize it so that the same browser wouldn't show up in the same spot every time. So you couldn't say, hey, the first browser the people would see would be whatever they're using. If they're using Safari, that would be the first choice. If they're using Firefox, that would be the first choice. We decided to randomize it so that at any time, it might be IE, it might be another one. And so that's the process we've chosen, and it's rolling out here pretty shortly. It does create some interesting challenges for us. because we are carrying the competitors there, and that has to be sandboxed out so that happens independently of everything else. Now then, we actually think we've got a pretty good browser, and we're going to market aggressively around that. That means talking about the benefits of the product through public relations, through advertising, through evangelism on a local basis, so that we tell our story around why we think Internet Explorer is the best browser. And at the end of the day, the consumers will get to decide which one that they want to install. But it's been an interesting communications challenge.
Another question?
Hi, Jennifer Jamal with Weber Shandwick. What Mr. Edelman was discussing, I think way at the beginning when we were talking about companies that do it right, that are really brand savvy and really reputation savvy, my question is kind of multi-pronged. Is there a time, or have you noticed, and we can confine this to tech, if just to make it easier, companies that you sort of looked at and said, yeah, they really did that right. They turned a debacle into a hiccup. And then the second part of my question is, are there any times, because we've been talking about outreach and really, really talking to your constituencies, but is there ever a time where silence is the right answer to protecting your reputation?
I'll take the first part, and then I'll let Frank or Paul or Dr. D take the second. I think a good example of turning something that was difficult into something positive was when Howard Schultz came back to Starbucks. And he found serious issues in morale. He found serious issues in kind of product delivery. And you may recall that he closed all the stores for 3 hours to teach people how to make coffee properly again. And that could have been a real kind of, insult to the baristas. But in fact, he turned it into a major positive. And he said, look, we have to have, this is the baseline. This is what we have to do. And then he started this My Starbucks idea and said, I want to crowdsource better product. If you guys have ideas, if our best customers have ideas, we're open for ideas. And one of the ideas was oatmeal. And they actually commercialized it and they make a hero product again. But I think if you've got issues, you've got to say, okay, here's our baseline. We're going forward together from here. And he's a charismatic leader, and he has the advantage of being kind of founder, owner, entrepreneur too. So, and people, as Paul said, like comeback stories, and this is one of them. But he took a lot of heat when he came back the first few months because it wasn't like an immediate turnaround. So you had to just stick with it too. So on the silence issue,
I guess I think the answer is yes. There are times when silence is the right answer, but it has to be very thoughtful. Because there are things, especially now when everybody is the media. Everybody's the media and everybody has a voice. There are things that will be said that you could look at and say these are reputation damaging. They're untrue or they're unfair, and we have the ability to respond to those. Most companies today have the ability to respond directly to the different audiences. And so you can look at something like that and say, hey, we're going to respond to every single untruth or thing that we feel is unfair. And that's a mistake because it would consume an enormous amount of resources. And in many cases, what you do is you draw attention to something. So you have to be smart about what is truly brand damaging and what is irritating. And if it's simply irritating, there are times you just have to step back and say, we're not going to engage on this one. And if it's brand damaging, then you have to bring all the resources to bear to fix it as rapidly as possible.
So I would just add, kind of the textbook way of looking at this is that silence is rarely golden, but there are instances when it can be helpful. And I'll give you an example. It's kind of the weird example is what Apple does. They actually use no comment to generate a massive interest in unannounced things. And I realize that's an exceptional brand. I don't know too many other companies that could get away with this kind of behavior, but silence enhances curiosity and interest in that company significantly. And I don't think it's by accident that they do that. They parse information out in very limited quantity, and when they do, They get a lot of people to consume it. And I think that's a deliberate strategy on their part. But in effect, if you go back to the subject of the panel, which is managing reputation, when you're silent, you give the field to somebody else to fill the storyline. And information, the vacuum is filled often by other people who paint an incorrect picture of your story, and therefore you need to counteract that with facts, with the right information in the market. So that's when silence is typically not helpful, when you give the field to your opponents.
Another question?
Hi, Pascavine from Intuit. I'm curious if you see a difference between brand and reputation. A number of times it's come up and been used interchangeably. So if you could talk about a little, that would be great.
So I just start, they're very related, but a brand is the promise, I think, that a company makes to its customers. Reputation is the sum total of a company's behavior, how it behaves in the market. So the two things influence one another. They're very closely related, but they have very different functions in terms of, the end user or the market.
Anyone else?
I think you nailed it.
Okay. Next question.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Barbara French. The question I'd like to start with Richard, but go to the full panel, including the moderator, which is based on the stories you've told us tonight, how would you expect us to start to reallocate our spending or our budgets and staff in marketing?
Dr. Diamandis had a very interesting point about the decreasing power of advertising. We, again, have been doing this study for 10 years, and you see today that only 13% of people believe that what they see in advertising is any sort of accurate representation. And that's a really wasted amount of money unless it is a reinforcing element as opposed to the primary element. I would shift my spend and I would shift my timing. In particular, I would try and have some sort of, first employees, second some sort of social and free media outreach, and then third advertising. Because I don't think that the advertising plane takes off until you've got a runway. And you cannot sell without that. So that's certainly a sequencing aspect.
Yeah, Peter.
I'll take it. Thank you for the handoff. I would say looking for brand-aligned, authentic actions. So again, the notion that this report speaks about, actions are far louder than words. So brand-aligned, authentic actions. The other thing is that there's so much noise out there today. We're at a peak of noise and growing exponentially. So the question is, how do you do a brand-aligned, authentic action that really is a clutter buster, that is going to capture attention? And I mean, that's what we try and do for hope and aspirational things. But I mean, that's why we do what we do.
I guess the thing I would say is that I'm not quite as bearish as Richard is on the power of great advertising. I think maybe one of the things we're seeing less good advertising and more of it, or we're noticing it more. Maybe. Because there's no doubt that great advertising breaks through like almost nothing else. But the real power, the thing that really works, is when you have integrated campaigns that all reinforce each other, and that every piece of the marketing mix has a role to play. The idea that we can live in narrow pipes where you have an advertising plan, and you have a public relations plan, and you have an executive communications plan, and employee communications. Hey, we'll throw in some digital here, and then at the end we'll sort of jerk them all together into sort of this Herculean, unnatural act and say it's a marketing plan. That doesn't work anymore because the interplay is so strong now, and the idea of like, what event do you create that you will then take from that event and create an ad. And that ad and that event together will be fodder for a social media site, because you'll drive people to a community that you've created, and then you'll tell a story around how this product or service was created that will reinforce that brand. That is the holy grail. And I think that the efforts generated, or the effort needs to be as much on the front end, on the planning end, as it does on the execution end.
I'll just add one quick thing. In Silicon Valley, there's engineering-dominated cultures, and the question was on spending priorities. I agree with Frank's comments about the overall marketing mix, but if you just look at the communications spend and how you allocate, companies need to actually spend more on reputation and less on product. And if you look around this room and you ask people where their dollars are being invested right now, I'm seeing a lot of heads nod. Most of our engineer founders around here are focused on product to the exclusion of reputation. So I'd say invest a little there too.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone out there? Oh, there's one over here.
The question to the panel is,
Yeah, we actually have a couple.
the question to the panel is, how much energy are companies or entities investing in sponsorship of events, which seem a vehicle to generating goodwill within specific communities, and advertising in a way that's passive in the sense that you're not promoting a message, but is active in the sense that you're actually supporting a particular community that's gathered for supporting some kind of endeavor?
We like it. I spent some time today with Intel's head of sponsorships. We were talking about different properties that align well to our brand. I think companies, when they make a commitment to reach youth and go X Games or decide to sponsor, some brand in that space, they have to not only decide this is a good investment of our precious marketing dollars, but they have to also make the commitment to activate that sponsorship. And sometimes companies go halfway and then, don't get the full value out of association with a particular brand. But it's a very good, technique, I think, to reach specific audience segments. And companies do it, some better than others.
I think companies have satisfied themselves by kind of paying money to people doing movies to put their cell phone into the movie and saying that's really brilliant sponsorship. I think that's utterly ineffectual. I think it's not sufficient. And I'll give you an example. We work with GlaxoSmithKline on a brand called Ally, and we just, with the Creative Coalition, they're going to do a movie on obesity in America, and it's with a grant, and they have a complete editorial license to do. This is correct, Gail? I more or less have this correct? This is good. I'm trained. But that's much more than getting a cell phone into a James Bond movie, if you follow, which is, to me, kind of 40 years ago kind of thinking. You can do better. You really can. And you should give much more license to creative thought than that.
Peter?
I think sponsorship has sort of an age-old thing which has gotten a little bit stale, and I think it can be revitalized. I think there's some dramatic things you can do. When we work a lot with corporations. In fact, we've gone from a philanthropic basis of support mostly to a corporate sponsorship basis of support, where we sit down with a company and we say, what is a big, objective, grand challenge for society that by you sponsoring this, you're actually going to solve the problem, not just have more eyeballs viewing a round or pointy ball moving down the field, but actually solve and create a historic event. And so, whether it's an Education X Prize or an autonomous car, the first time an autonomous car beats a top-seeded Grand Prix race car driver in a national Grand Prix, I think that'd be global.
All right. I want to thank all our panelists. I think you did an excellent job. I want to thank the audience. Thank you. I want to thank the audience for coming and participating. I think we learned that transparency isn't going out of style, that authenticity is important, that the CEO shouldn't be the only advocate for your brand. We learned that Toyota could have done a hell of a better job in handling its crisis, and that everyone on the panel would have dumped Tiger Woods faster than Accenture, Gatorade, or Gillette. Thank you very much.
Way to go.
Well done.
I'd like to thank everyone on the panel and thank John for terrific moderation. And the other thing we've learned tonight is you can always count on the Churchill Club to bring you a good program. So with that, we'd like to now pass out to all the panelists the memorable Churchill Club t-shirt. Let's thank Edelman PR one more time for sponsorship tonight. See you soon.